Night shift gas station clerks of Reddit. What's the weirdest thing you've ever encountered? I had a friend who worked at a gas station. An armed robber came in one night and told my friend to empty the register. Being completely dumbfounded by the situation, my friend told him that he had to buy something first. This is because to open the register, an item from the gas station needed to be scanned at the register. According to my friend, they stared at each other completely silent and bewildered for a few seconds. After that, my friend had regained enough of his faculties to explain this to the robber. Then the robber scanned a Twix, took all the money in the register and left. Twix bar for the win. Yeah, I've always been curious if the robber was like, I'm just gonna grab something, or if he thought, this Twix would be the cherry on top of this armed robbery and I should treat myself. I was working at a mobile late one night in my hometown, which is a summer vacation hotspot, when a middle-aged man who looked like he just walked off a golf course. He was obviously a little drunk, but drunk middle-aged men who golf was the norm for tourists, so I took no heed. He came up to the counter and I heard him ask me if there were any gay bars in town. I told him no, that the closest one I was aware of was in Provincetown, a gay hotspot which was an optimistic hour drive away with traffic. He then asked me if I was interested in fooling around with him. I replied no, and in an attempt to soften the rejection I joked I don't think my girlfriend would be too happy about that, which seemed to excite the guy as he redoubled his efforts. His big pitch was that he had an especially nice van that we could pull into the garage bay to use. Granted, it looked like a nice van, but didn't sway my stance. After another 5 minutes he seemed to resign to his fate and he left the store. I thought we were done and went back to reading. Half an hour later I hear a car start up and leave the lot. I didn't realize he had just stayed in his van and was waiting for me. I figured, creepy, but whatever, he's gone. So I put it out of my mind. A couple hours after that I was closing up shop, and I had to go out on a ladder to change the prices on the sign for the next day. The town is deserted at this point and all the lights at the station were off save a couple in the garage. While I'm up on the ladder, the same van screeches back into the lot. I'm up on a ladder in the dark alone. Not thrilled about this development. He hopped out and hollered, "I forgot to pay you." I figured that I had given him smokes or something and just forgot to charge him as I was rejecting his advances. So I asked him for what. He replied, "I forgot to try and pay you for a good time." I paused. He yelled 250. It occurred to me that I could probably just take the dude's money and run, but I correctly assessed that would be really stupid. So I yelled, "Deaf man. No means no." Still on the ladder, he yelled, "Jesus Christ." Fine. And peeled out. Never saw him again. Thankfully. I love Jesus Christ. Fine. Like you were overreacting. I worked in a rural gas station garage when I was in high school. One evening I was working and there were some pretty bad storms brewing. It didn't take long for there to be a fairly large group of people stopped at the station to find some shelter. I didn't think much of it. Wasn't the first time it had happened. But then they started blowing the tornado sirens. All of a sudden there's a bunch of adults and families looking at little 16-year-old me looking for answers. There's no basement, so I did the first thing I could think of and shoved them all in the walk-in cooler. Shut us all in and rode out the storm. When it passed I went out and there was a big plate glass window busted and some sh blown around the store. All the people came out of the cooler and were pretty much like, "See you later," and left. I was pretty much left there by myself like, what the F just happened? Not a gas station, but a train station cafe. There were overnight works going on, so we stayed open until 1 or 2 AM for the builders. One night this older gentleman comes in, well dressed, asks for a coffee but can't pay when I make it. I give it to him anyway since I'll just throw it otherwise. And he asks me for some cake. I refuse. And he goes icing for my supper. And then starts to belt out Frank Sinatra right there in the shop. And he just won't stop. He's there for like half an hour. I tried to get security to look after him because he clearly wasn't all there. Found him later, singing for the builders who were giving him sandwiches. Eventually called the local police who got him supervised until he could catch a train home in the morning. That is clearly a bard. And they seem to have failed a performance check. I worked overnights at an isolated gas station the summer after I graduated high school. Way back in the late 1980s. This gas station had hot pizza in a clear case. And this case opened from the back. You'd open the case, pull out a slice, put it on a plate and hand it to the customer. One day when I came in at 11 PM, there were 3 slices left in the case, which was 3 or 4 feet down the counter from the register. I had 1 piece for dinner, then went about working my shift, which consisted of standing at the register waiting for people to wander in. It was a slow shift. I had only 4 or 5 customers in a couple of hours. Not a busy shift by any means. And most just wanted lottery tickets or to pay for gas or grab a pop. But by 1 AM, there was no one in the store or at the pumps. So I got started neatening the store. Always in eyesight of the front counter, the register, the lotto machine and the pizza case, and no one came in for the hour I was schlepping around trying to make it look like I was working. Figuring the pizza was pretty well dried out by then, I went to throw it out. Opened the case and there was just an empty tray. Somehow 2 slices of, probably 5 hours old pizza, disappeared. Now, the only way to get into the pizza case was to get behind the counter, and to do that, you had to punch in a code and then the door would buzz really loud and unlock. In other words, you couldn't just reach around the counter and get to the pizza. I scratched my head. Spent the rest of my shift nervously worrying that there was some rando pizza eating killer hiding in the store. And when a sheriff's deputy came in around 4 AM, I asked him to check the building for any intruders. He didn't find anyone. Before leaving at the end of my shift, I wrote a note to my boss detailing what happened. Then went home. When I came in for my next shift, he was there waiting and told me he reviewed the video. There were cameras aimed at the front counter, door, and over the store, and played it back for me. It showed me ringing out a customer, then going and neatening up the shelves. Meanwhile, on the front counter camera, a couple of minutes after I left the counter area, the camera got shaky and then went to static for 30 seconds or so. When it came back on, the pizza was no longer in the case. Never happened again while I worked there, which was for another 6 months or so, and we never did figure out what happened. TL. Dr. Random Pizza Ghost came into my gas station and stole 2 pieces of pizza. The ghost probably ate gas station pizza earlier, died, and is now condemned to eating it forever. Years ago I worked overnights at a gas station in a pretty bad neighborhood in Florida. My first night working there, an older guy came in, walked up to the counter and reached across and punched me in the jaw pretty hard. The guy I was working with chased him out the door while I called the cops to send someone over. My co-worker came back in pretty quick looking frightened and said to send an ambulance because the crazy guy just died outside. EMT and police came. Guy was alive but had a pretty bad heart attack. Every other shift was pretty timid compared to that. Florida man punched me and he didn't live to tell about it. IDK if this was necessarily weird, but more luck. During and after high school I worked at this crappy gas station that closed up at 11 PM. I started doing my cleaning duties when I noticed a penny on the ground. I picked it up, kept sweeping until I noticed a dime by the door. This wasn't unusual since people drop change all the time. As I was picking it up though, something caught my eye as it blew past the door. I went outside, looked right. Nothing. Looked left and there sat a fat wad of cash. It was nearly $300 laying on the ground. Yes, I kept it. No one ever stopped back by asking about it ever. I don't know why, but I was expecting you to find a strategically placed line of money leading you out to some dangerous person in the darkness. I was a 7-11 night clerk for about 5 years when I was young. The big nightly event was the 2 AM rush. The cutoff for selling alcohol when I'd run a bar through the beer cooler doors. There was always a bunch of people coming in just before. And always a few coming in after that would beg and argue and I'd just have to say no. One time around 3 AM an older drunk but well dressed Mexican guy comes in. 2 really pretty girls with him. Argues and pleads with me to sell him some beer for about 15 minutes. He was oddly pleasant. Seemed like a guy no one said no to. But I said no. He went out with the girls then came back in alone. Looked at me and smiled. Pulled a giant wad of bills from his pocket and peeled off a 20. Sat it on the counter. Walked over to the cooler and pulled out a case of beer through the bars. Then as I'm telling him I can't sell that to him, he reaches in his other pocket and pulls out a baggie of illegal stuff. Wags it in the air in front of me significantly. Sits that on the $20 bill and says "Esta todo bien, mi amigo," with a wink. And walks out the door with the beer. Another time around 3 AM again these 2 young girls came in and wandered the store for about a half hour. Laughing their ass off at everything. Literally rolling on the floor laughing. Reading the labels of the candy bars and stuff like that. I talked to them enough that they told me they'd eaten some mushrooms. Finally they picked out a couple of candy bars and a couple sodas. At the counter I rang them up and they realized they didn't have any money, which was hilariously funny, and they were on the floor laughing again. I bagged their stuff and told them not to worry about it. Sweeping the lot after they left I could hear them still laughing down the street. The last story is why I love psychedelics. Crackheads will try to rob you. People on shrooms just laugh their ass off. Working security in a bad neighborhood. This guy walking minding his own business in a cowboy hat, cowboy shoes, and a thong carrying around a raccoon. It looked like he was feeding the raccoon something. I locked my doors ASAP. Florida man.